Did you know that the Vietnam War was one of the longest and most controversial wars in U.S. history? This was a conflict that stretched over years, pulling in not only North and South Vietnam, but also the Soviet Union and the United States. It was a war of attrition, a war that divided nations, and a war that caused heartache and loss on an unimaginable scale. It left a mark on the American public that still echoes today. Now let's dive into the chronological events of this war to understand its complexity. The roots of the Vietnam War can be traced back to French colonial rule and the Japanese occupation during World War II. Let's take a moment to rewind the clock back to the late 19th century. Vietnam, a culturally rich and vibrant nation in Southeast Asia, was under the yoke of French colonial rule. The French imprint was deep and pervasive, influencing everything from governance to culture. But beneath this imposed veneer, a spirit of resistance was simmering. Fast forward to the early 20th century. A young Vietnamese man named Ho Chi Minh was beginning to make his mark. He was a visionary, a revolutionary, and a man of the people. His desire to see his beloved Vietnam free from foreign rule. Then came World War II, a tumultuous period that saw the Japanese occupation of Vietnam. The French were ousted, and the Japanese took the reins. It was a time of hardship, but also a time of awakening. Amid the chaos, Ho Chi Minh and his comrades formed the Viet Minh, an organization committed to Vietnamese independence. The Viet Minh were determined to seize the moment. They fought against Japanese forces, gaining the support of the local population. Ho Chi Minh emerged as a national hero, a beacon of hope for a free Vietnam. When World War II ended, the Viet Minh declared Vietnam's independence, with Ho Chi Minh as its leader. But the joy was short-lived. The French were not ready to relinquish their grip on Vietnam. They returned, sparking a bitter war of independence that lasted almost a decade. The Viet Minh, under Ho Chi Minh's leadership, fought valiantly against the French forces. This period was the crucible of the Vietnam War. It was a time of struggle and sacrifice, of dreams and determination. It was a time when the seeds of conflict were sown, laying the foundation for the tumultuous events that were to follow. The seeds of the conflict were sown during this period, setting the stage for the Vietnam War. The 1960s marked a significant escalation in the Vietnam War, shaped by key events and decisions. A pivotal moment was the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, passed in response to reported attacks on U.S. naval vessels by North Vietnamese forces. This resolution gave the U.S. president the power to conduct military operations in Southeast Asia without declaring war, effectively granting a carte blanche for escalating American involvement. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution set the stage for Operation Rolling Thunder. This was a sustained bombing campaign against North Vietnam, launched in the early spring of 1965. The main goal of this operation was to cripple North Vietnam's ability to wage war against the South, and to boost the morale of the South Vietnamese. Operation Rolling Thunder was a massive undertaking, involving thousands of sorties, and dropping millions of tons of explosives over the course of 3 years. But the bombing campaign did not stay confined to the borders of Vietnam. The war spilled over into neighboring Laos, a neutral country. The U.S. saw the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a supply route that ran through Laos, as a critical artery feeding the war effort of the North Vietnamese. To cut off this supply line, the U.S. conducted extensive bombing campaigns in Laos, turning it into one of the most heavily bombed countries in history. These events, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and Operation Rolling Thunder, marked a significant increase in U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. It was a shift from providing support and advice to South Vietnam to actively engaging in combat operations against the North. This escalation marked a turning point in the war, leading to a significant deployment of U.S. troops in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was characterized by a policy of attrition, leading to heavy casualties on both sides. Attrition, a military strategy designed to wear down the enemy to the point of collapse through continuous losses in personnel and material, was a salient feature of the Vietnam War. The strategy was brutal, relentless, and devastating, resulting in a staggering loss of life. Both North and South Vietnam, along with their respective allies, bore the brunt of this strategy. It wasn't just the soldiers on the front lines who paid the price. The war also had a profound and lasting impact on the civilian population. Families were torn apart, villages were destroyed, and the landscape of Vietnam was altered forever. The war's human toll was immense, with millions of lives lost. Each life represented a person with hopes, dreams, and loved ones. The scale of the tragedy is almost too vast to comprehend, and the effects of this attrition strategy rippled out far beyond the battlefield. The psychological scars endured by the survivors and the societal wounds inflicted on the Vietnamese people are still evident today. As the war dragged on, the chances for a decisive victory dwindled and the focus shifted towards finding a way to end the conflict. The turning point arrived in 1975 with the fall of Saigon. This marked the official end of the Vietnam War, with the North Vietnamese forces claiming victory. In the aftermath, Vietnam was unified under the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, marking the beginning of a new era for the war-torn nation. The end of the war didn't mean the end of the struggle, however. The country faced the daunting task of rebuilding and healing from the deep wounds inflicted by the war. In 1975, the long and brutal Vietnam War came to an end, leaving a lasting impact on all parties involved. The legacy of the Vietnam War, a war of attrition that took millions of lives, continues to reverberate in the hearts and minds of those who lived through it and those who study it today. The Vietnam War has left an indelible mark on the pages of history. As we've traversed through the roots of this conflict, the escalation and the attrition leading up to the end, we've seen a narrative of a war that was as divisive as it was prolonged. A war that saw the world's superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, backing the south and north of Vietnam respectively, in a conflict that resulted in over 3 million deaths, a significant number of whom were civilians. This war, which stemmed from Vietnam's history of French colonial rule, Japanese occupation during World War II, and the subsequent struggle for independence led by Ho Chi Minh, saw the U.S. involvement escalate in the 1960s. Operation Rolling Thunder, the extensive bombing campaigns, and the significant deployment of U.S. troops all paint a picture of a conflict characterized by a policy of attrition. The implications of the Vietnam War are still felt today, and the lessons learned continue to influence U.S. foreign policy. This war, which ended with the unification of Vietnam under the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, has sparked ongoing debates about the role of the United States in global conflicts. Was it a necessary fight against the spread of communism, or was it a tragic intervention in a civil war? These questions continue to shape discussions on U.S. foreign policy and intervention. The Vietnam War also left a significant impact on the veterans who served and the families who lost their loved ones. It serves as a reminder of the cost of war, not just in terms of lives lost, but also in the psychological and social toll it takes on individuals and societies. It has become a symbol of the complexities of war, the consequences of political decisions, and the human cost of ideological battles. Whether viewed as a necessary fight against communism or a tragic intervention in a civil war, the Vietnam War remains a defining moment in U.S. history. It's a chapter that continues to shape and influence the world we live in today, reminding us of the profound impact our decisions can have on the page